Gather round, fellow dreamers, for the tale of Withering Humanity, brought to vivid life by the dream weavers at StoryWave.ai. Engage with our dreams by liking, sharing, and subscribing for a new story every day. Chapter 1. The Calm Before. Dawn unfurled over the Roman encampment with a deceptive serenity, the sun's first rays glinting off polished armor and casting long shadows between the tents. Cassius Valerius, known to his men as the Hawk for his piercing gaze and commanding presence, strode through the ranks of his legionaries, the crisp morning air doing little to ease the weight of his thoughts. His muscular frame, accustomed to the rigors of war, carried a fatigue that was more than physical. It was the weariness of a soul yearning for respite from the incessant drumbeat of conflict. The centurion's steel-gray eyes swept over the men he had molded from raw recruits into the empire's finest. His well-groomed beard, streaked with the evidence of many campaigns, twitched in the brisk breeze as he paused to watch his soldiers ready themselves for the day's drills. In these moments, Cassius allowed himself a rare indulgence, reflections on a life spent in service to Rome, the sacrifices made, and the family he had left behind to ensure their dominion endured. As the legion prepared, the sound of metal upon metal rang out like a chorus, heralding the onset of war. Yet amidst this symphony of readiness, Cassius's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected figure at the camp's periphery. Artaxerxes Persicus, a man whose lean build belied the strength within, approached with the grace of one who had navigated the treacherous waters of diplomacy his entire life. Known as the diplomat, he bore no visible scars, but possessed an eloquence that could disarm the most belligerent of foes. Artaxerxes sought audience with Cassius, offering a missive of peace in a voice calm and persuasive, his dark brown eyes holding a sincerity that could not be feigned. The centurion listened intently, the baritone of his response measured, betraying none of the turmoil that churned beneath his stoic exterior. Their exchange was a delicate dance of words, each phrase a step towards understanding or conflict. Peace, you say? Cassius's skepticism was evident, even as he entertained the notion. Rome knows not of peace, only of the next conquest, the next victory. Yet victory can be had in many forms, countered Artaxerxes smoothly. Persia extends an olive branch, one that promises an end to bloodshed. The centurion's hand instinctively went to the pommel of his gladius, the weapon and extension of his being. And what price does this peace demand? Dialogue, understanding, a cessation of hostilities that benefits both our peoples. Is that not a price worth paying? Cassius turned away, gazing toward the imposing walls of Constantinople, their stones steeped in history and defiance. The world is not shaped by words alone, emissary. It is carved by the sword and shielded by the courage of those willing to wield them. Artaxerxes followed his gaze, his own expression contemplative. And yet, history is also written by those who dare to dream of a world unmarred by the horrors of war. Is it not worth exploring the possibility of a legacy that speaks not only of conquest, but of the peace you so desire? Their conversation flowed, the centurion's reluctance warring with an innate understanding that true strength sometimes lay in the sheathing of one's sword. As the day aged, the two men found themselves in an unlikely camaraderie, their exchange a prelude to an alliance that might never see the light if fate had its cruel way. Unbeknownst to them, beyond the horizon, an insidious plague festered, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their civilizations. The dead, fueled by a hunger as ancient as it was vile, were stirring, their shadows poised to engulf the world they knew in a darkness unimagined. Thus the stage was set, the players assembled, the calm before the tempest that would test the mettle of empires and the durability of the human spirit. In this fleeting tranquility, Cassius Valerius and Artaxerxes Persicus stood at the precipice of oblivion, their choices echoing into eternity. Chapter 2. Ominous Whispers. A pallor of dread crept over the Roman encampment as the day waned, whispers of a malignant affliction among the Persian captives, breeding a disquiet that not even the most stoic could fully dismiss. Cassius, his countenance as hard as the iron of his gladius, could sense the subtle shift in the air, a precursor to a storm yet unseen. Within the confines of a makeshift stockade, a Persian prisoner, his skin once the rich hue of the fertile lands of his birth, now bore the pallid sheen of death. The man's breaths came in shallow gasps, a rhythmic harbinger of the end. Cassius stood by, observing the captive's decline with an analytical yet detached gaze, his mind grappling with the strategic implications of this unanticipated foe, disease. Artaxerxes, upon receiving word of the unsettling developments, approached with a pace that betrayed his concern. The news from Persia, carried on the breath of fleeting messengers, spoke of a plague that had taken hold, a scourge that knew no ally nor enemy, ravaging friend and foe alike. Cassius, the whispers from my homeland speak of villages emptied, of families consumed by this pestilence, Artaxerxes confided, his customary diplomatic veneer marred by the gravity of the situation. The empire has seen its share of plagues, Cassius replied, his voice a low rumble of consideration. But this seems a different beast altogether. As night enveloped the camp, the Persian captive exhaled his last breath, his body becoming still in the eerie moonlight. The soldiers tasked with disposing of the remains bore solemn expressions, their usual banter replaced by a somber silence. Yet, as the burial detail made their way to the outskirts of the encampment, the unthinkable occurred. The body, once a vessel of life, now a husk of expiration, stirred. With a convulsive jerk, the dead man rose, his movements grotesque parodies of the living. The soldiers recoiled in horror as the reanimated captive lunged with a ravenous hunger that was no longer human. Cassius, alerted by the commotion, arrived to witness a scene that defied all reason and experience. The reanimated Persian, his eyes devoid of soul, clawed at the air with a ferocity that chilled the blood. Without hesitation, Cassius drew his weapon, his actions swift and decisive, severing the head from the body with a single fluid motion. The legionaries stood in stunned silence, their gazes locked on the decapitated form that finally lay motionless. Cassius, his chest heaving with the exertion of battle, turned to Artaxerxes, his expression one of grim acknowledgement. "This is no ordinary affliction," Cassius stated, the reality of their predicament crashing upon them like a relentless tide. Artaxerxes, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and resolve, nodded. "This plague carries the stench of death, and something far more sinister. We must alert the Senate, seek their counsel. And what of the peace you so earnestly seek?" Cassius inquired, his mind already turning to the defense of the empire against an enemy that could not be slain on the battlefield alone. "The peace I desire is for naught if our people are consumed by this darkness," Artaxerxes conceded, his voice a mix of sorrow and determination. "We stand upon a precipice, Cassius. Our choices now will shape the fate of empires." As the night deepened, the camp was rife with uneasy murmurs, the soldiers grasping for solace in the face of a terror that threatened to unravel the very foundations of their world. In this moment of foreboding stillness, Cassius and Artaxerxes stood united, their alliance forged not in the fires of war, but in the looming shadow of an apocalypse that would test the limits of humanity's will to survive. Chapter 3. The Fall of Man. A blood-red sun hung low over the siege lines outside Constantinople, its fading light an ill omen for the chaos that was about to unfold. The Roman and Persian forces, moments ago locked in the throes of battle for the city's dominion, now stood on the precipice of an abyss far more terrifying than any conflict wrought by man. Cassius, his senses honed by years of combat, felt the unease in his marrow before the first reanimated corpse clawed its way out of the beleaguered earth. The dead, rising in droves from the no-man's land littered with the fallen, became a macabre mirror of the living's struggle for power. Beside him, Artaxerxes bore witness to the horror, his mind reeling at the sight of Persian warriors, their limbs animated by a dark will, turning on their once comrades with a voraciousness that defied nature. The peace he had sought to broker now lay in tatters amidst the gnashing teeth of an unfathomable enemy. "Cassius, what devilry is this?" Artaxerxes cried out over the din of clashing metal and the guttural moans of the undead. With his gladius drawn and eyes alert, Cassius responded, "A test of our resolve, emissary. We must rally our forces and forge a path through this nightmare." The centurion's voice carried across the ranks, his commands slicing through the terror with the precision of his blade. "Formations. Protect each other's flanks. Do not let these abominations divide us. Men, once paralyzed by fear, found their courage in Cassius's enduring command. A phalanx formed, a shield wall against the wave of undead that threatened to engulf them. The battle-hardened soldiers, their training now a lifeline, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Artaxerxes, though no soldier, brandished a fallen spear, his diplomatic finesse replaced by the primal instinct to survive. We must send word to our homelands, warn them of this scourge. Cassius nodded, cleaving through the flesh of an enemy that felt no pain, no fear. Aye, but first we must secure a bastion against this tide. Fall back to the gates. As the living pressed back against the inexorable advance of the dead, the siege engines, once instruments of war, now served as barricades against the horde. The Romans and Persians, enemies in life, became allies in the face of death's relentless march. The battlefield, a tableau of carnage, echoed with the sounds of metal rending decayed flesh, the cries of the dying, and the unyielding roars of the living. Cassius, his arm weary from the slaughter, locked eyes with Artaxerxes. In that fleeting glance, a silent pact was forged, an understanding that the world they knew was crumbling beneath the weight of this new, grotesque reality. As it bit of man's dominion waned, the legion and their unexpected allies stood shoulder to shoulder amidst the ruins of their ambitions. The dead, their numbers swelling with each fallen warrior, pressed on, oblivious to the wounds that would have felled any living foe. In the heart of the maelstrom, Cassius's voice rang out, a navigation light of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Stand fast. Fight not for glory, but for the breath in your lungs, the blood in your veins. This was the crucible in which the metal of humanity would be tested, the line drawn between life and the abyss. As the night drew its black curtain over the world, the living banded together, their will to survive the last flickering flame in an age that would be remembered as the fall of man. Chapter 4: Through Blood and Fire. The besieged city of Constantinople loomed like a silent sentinel above the chaos, its ancient walls witnesses to a new kind of siege, one not of battering rams and catapults, but of flesh turned against flesh. Cassius, his armor dented and smeared with the dark ichor of the undead, stood back to back with Artaxerxes, each man a bulwark against the relentless tide of their once brethren. The centurion's voice cut through the dissonance, his commands sharp as the blade he swung with lethal precision. We hold the line. Push them back with shield and fire. Artaxerxes, his features set in a grim mask, fought with a desperation fueled by more than survival. My family, they are stricken. He gasped between thrusts of his spear. This curse, it has reached the heart of Persia. Cassius's reply was a grunt as he dispatched another of the ravenous corpses. Then we fight not only for today, but for all our tomorrows. Their conversation, a grim exchange amidst the pandemonium, was punctuated by the clash of metal and the snarls of the undead. Around them, Roman and Persian soldiers formed a phalanx, their shields interlocked, creating a barrier of wood and iron that stemmed the onslaught. The centurion's gaze met that of his ally, the hawk's intensity finding an echo in the ox's steadfastness. Artaxerxes, we cannot stand divided. Our men look to us for unity, for strength. The emissary nodded, his throat tight with the knowledge that his family's plight was now the plight of the world. Together, then. For if we are to perish, let it be with honor. The two men, their origins as distant as the stars above, fought with a synchronicity that transcended language and culture. Each strike, each parry, was a colloquy to their newfound bond, a partnership forged in the crucible of battle. As the night deepened, the fires set by the defenders cast an infernal glow over the battlefield. The undead, their numbers seemingly inexhaustible, surged against the flames, their decaying flesh sizzling and popping like fat on a spit. Cassius, his energy flagging but his spirit unyielding, caught a fleeting glimpse of a standard-bearer, the eagle of Rome tattered but defiant. "For the Empire!" he roared, the cry rallying the weary soldiers who echoed the sentiment in a resounding chorus. Artaxerxes, his voice laced with the sorrow of his people's suffering, added his own battle cry. "For Persia, for the lives we once knew." The two cries melded into one, a singular plea for deliverance that rose above the din of war. The soldiers, heartened by the unity of their leaders, redoubled their efforts, pushing back the horde with a ferocity that belied their exhaustion. As dawn approached, The field before the gates of Constantinople was a tableau of horror and valor, the earth soaked with blood and littered with the remnants of the fallen. Cassius and Artaxerxes, their weapons slick with the evidence of their struggle, stood amidst the carnage, their alliance sealed in the shared blood of their peoples. The centurion, his chest heaving with exertion, turned to the emissary, his eyes reflecting the inferno that surrounded them. "We have held, emissary, but at what cost?" Artaxerxes, his face gaunt with the toll of battle, replied, "A cost that we will continue to pay, centurion, for this fight is far from over." Together they looked out upon the shattered remnants of their forces, knowing that the day's reprieve was but a momentary breath in the relentless gale of this new, dark age. This was their reality now. A world where the line between life and death was blurred, where every victory was Pyrrhic, and every dawn brought with it the promise of renewed horror. Yet in the hearts of the two leaders, the faintest ember of hope still flickered. For as long as they stood united, as long as they could wield sword and spear in defense of humanity, there remained a chance, however slim, for salvation. In the face of the apocalypse, they would carve a path through blood and fire, their perseverance unbroken, their spirits indomitable. Chapter 5: Ashes of Empire. The Theodosian walls, once the unbreachable bulwark of Constantinople, now stood as the final refuge for the beleaguered survivors of a war-turned-massacre. Behind the ancient fortifications, Cassius, with the weariness of countless battles etched upon his visage, surveyed the throng of weary Romans and Persians seeking respite from the relentless undead. The air within was thick with the musk of fear and exhaustion, an acute differentiation to the once glorious city that had bustled with the vibrancy of empire. The survivors, their faces gaunt with hunger and eyes hollow from loss, clung to the vestiges of hope amidst the ruins of their world. Amid the hushed conversations and clatter of makeshift camps, rumors of dwindling provisions stirred unrest like a serpent amongst the wounded. A group of legionaries, their discipline frayed by the prospect of starvation, began to voice their dissent in hushed yet fervent tones. "We followed Cassius to these walls for salvation," one soldier muttered, his voice a low growl. "Yet what future do we have trapped like penned cattle, waiting for death to scale these stones?" Cassius, his presence commanding despite the weight of his own doubts, overheard the murmurs of insurrection. "Men of Rome," he began, his voice resonating with the authority that had led them through countless sieges, "the enemy is without, not within. We must not turn on each other in these desperate times." The soldier met Cassius's gaze, the challenge in his eyes tempered by the respect earned through shared battles. "Centurion, we need more than words to fill our bellies. We need action, or we will perish not by the teeth of the dead, but by the hands of hunger." Cassius nodded, his countenance reflecting the gravity of their plight. "I will lead foraging parties beyond the walls. We will find sustenance or die trying, but we will not let despair consume us." The mutterings subsided, the soldier's defiance yielding to the centurion's unshakable will. In the face of uncertainty, the promise of action, however perilous, was a balm to their fraying spirits. Meanwhile, Artaxerxes, his usually eloquent speech burdened with the weight of impending famine, addressed the mixed assembly of Persian and Roman survivors. "People of two great empires," he implored, "our fates are now intertwined like the roots of two trees in a single soil. We must unite, share our knowledge, our strengths, for the betterment of all." A Roman matron, her aristocratic bearing diminished by the dreariness of their situation, stepped forward. "Emissary, your words are fair, but how can we trust those we once called enemy? How do we know they will not slit our throats as we sleep?" Artaxerxes met her gaze, his own eyes reflecting the shared humanity that transcended their former enmity. "Madam, the dead know no allegiance, no creed. They hunger for the flesh of Persian and Roman alike. In this new world, trust is not a luxury, it is our only currency." The matron's lips pressed into a thin line, the logic of his argument warring with the ingrained prejudices of a lifetime. Yet in the end, survival was the great equalizer, and she nodded, albeit reluctantly. As the day waned, Cassius and Artaxerxes, their leadership tested by more than the horrors outside the walls, labored to forge a semblance of order from the chaos. They organized patrols, rationed the scant food, and most importantly, fostered a fragile camaraderie amongst the survivors. The Theodosian walls, the last bastion of the old world, became the crucible for a new society, one born of necessity and the indomitable will to endure. In the ashes of empire, amidst the labyrinth of human emotion and the desolation of loss, a flicker of civilization endured, a testimony to the fortitude etched in the very bones of those who refused to succumb to the darkness. Chapter 6: The Gathering Storm. The once impenetrable Theodosian walls, now a fragile shell around the remnants of humanity, echoed with the guttural cries of the undead. The siege, a grotesque mimicry of the sieges of old, saw no engines of war, no battering rams, only the relentless press of bodies, driven by an insatiable hunger. Within this besieged sanctuary, Cassius, his dark hair matted with the grime of battle, surveyed the brooding horizon with a grim determination. The centurion, though wounded by a rogue arrow, still commanded the respect and attention of his legionaries, his presence a bastion against the growing despair. The legionaries gathered around their wounded leader, their faces etched with the scars of war and fear. Among them, a young soldier named Tiberius spoke up, his voice betraying his uncertainty. "Cassius, we are but a flickering flame in a tempest. Shall we flee this place, seek refuge in the countryside, or stand and fight with what little we have?" Cassius, leaning heavily on his sword, turned to address the sea of expectant faces. To flee is to abandon hope, to abandon the principles that have guided us through the darkest of times. We are Romans, we stand and fight. We fortify our positions, make every stone a fortress, every corridor a choke point. The men nodded, taking solace in his unswerving resolve, though the doubt never truly left their eyes. It was then that Lucius, a grizzled veteran with ambitions as sharp as his pilum, stepped forward. "And what if you fall, Cassius? Who then shall lead us?" Cassius fixed Lucius with a steel-gray stare. "Then you shall look to each other, for the strength of Rome lies not in one man but in the collective will of its people." Meanwhile, Artaxerxes wrestled with a tormenting decision, the pull of his heartstrings leading him towards the distant lands of Persia, where his family faced the plague's cruel embrace. He confided in Cassius, his voice laced with sorrow. "My kin are out there, possibly suffering, possibly changed. Can I, in good conscience, remain while they endure this curse alone?" Cassius, his usual stoicism softened by the emissary's plight, laid a hand on his shoulder. "Your duty lies where your heart leads you. If you must leave, do so knowing you have been a true ally." Artaxerxes grappled with the gravity of his choice, the internal strife as palpable as the moans of the dead outside the walls. To abandon this unity, the fragile peace we have forged, it feels akin to betrayal. Betrayal, Cassius mused, is to deny one's true nature. You are a son, a brother, honor that, for we all fight for the chance to reclaim what was once ours. The emissary's resoluteness crystallized, his path clear, though fraught with peril. "Then I shall make preparations. If I can save but a fragment of my bloodline, it will be a light against this encroaching darkness." As the storm clouds of fate gathered above the city, the living within made ready for the assault they knew would come. The undead, an ever-present shroud of death, clawed at the walls with a tenacity that belied their decayed forms. Cassius, his wound a throbbing reminder of his mortality, organized the defense with meticulous care. Artaxerxes, his heart heavy with the impending departure, sought to integrate the skills and knowledge of Persians and Romans into a unified force. Together they faced the gathering storm, their fates entwined in the struggle against the relentless siege of the undead. The city, a once proud testament to the achievements of man, now stood as the final bastion of hope in a world where the ashes of empire were all that remained of a civilization teetering on the brink of oblivion. Chapter 7: The Last Stand. Under a sky smeared with the crimson strokes of dawn, the Theodosian walls, scarred by centuries and recent onslaughts, trembled with the impact of the undead horde. The once unyielding barriers, now breached in places, spewed forth a tide of death that sought to drown the last remnants of the living in its cold embrace. Cassius, his form a monument to the toll of relentless combat, moved among the defenders with a presence that burned brighter in the face of oblivion. His voice, a clarion call to arms, roused the heart of every weary soldier who had thought their courage spent. "Brothers, sisters, This day we carve our fates into the commentary of history, not with ink but with the steel of our resolve. He thundered, his eyes reflecting the inferno of battle that raged around them. Artaxerxes, his own spear slick with the blackened ichor of the undead, stood shoulder to shoulder with Cassius. We are the bulwark against the night. Persians and Romans, we are one in this fight. The clash of weapons and the cries of the battle-weary filled the air, a raucousness that underscored the desperation of their plight. Tiberius, his youthful countenance marred by the horrors he had witnessed, fought with a ferocity that belied his years. "Centurion, what hope have we against such numbers?" he asked, his voice nearly lost amidst the chaos. Cassius, dispatching another of the festering assailants, replied without missing a beat. "Our hope lies in each other, in every heart that beats in defiance of this plague. We stand until the end." The survivors, a motley assembly of what once were opposing forces, now fought with a unity forged in the crucible of shared doom. The clattering of armor and the shattering of shields punctuated their struggle as they sought to stem the tide that flowed through the breaches in the ancient walls. Lucius, his ambition now a distant memory, fought with a grim determination, lending his blade to the defense of a city that had become a symbol of their will to endure. "For every one of us that falls, 10 of these cursed fiends shall join them in death," he bellowed, his voice rising above the din. The battle raged, the lines between life and undeath blurred amidst the dust and blood that filled the air. Cassius, his wound a burning reminder of his mortality, led charge after charge, his form a warning amidst the shadows. The living pushed back with the strength of their ancestors, every strike a prayer for salvation, every fallen foe a step closer to survival. Artaxerxes, his mind fraught with images of his distant homeland, fought with the knowledge that this stand could mark the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning for all humanity. As the sun climbed higher, casting a light that seemed incongruous with the darkness below, the survivors rallied around their leaders, their voices joining in a litany of defiance. "We are the last. We are the living. For those we have lost, for those we can yet save." The undead horde, relentless in their hunger, surged forward in waves of decay, but the walls, steeped in the blood of generations, held strong in the hands of those who would not yield. The air was thick with the stench of death and the fervor of survival, the two forces locked in an eternal dance of destruction and hope. In this crucible of apocalypse, Cassius and Artaxerxes stood as pillars of light against the encroaching dark. Their words and deeds, the rallying cry that would echo through the ages, a monument to the unyielding will of humanity in the face of its withering. Chapter 8. Dawn of the New Day. The first light of dawn cast a solemn glow over the remnants of the city, the shattered stones of Constantinople still echoing with the ghosts of battle. Survivors emerged like wraiths from the shadows of the Theodosian walls, their eyes reflecting the cost writ upon their souls. Amidst the ruins, Cassius stood with an uncharacteristic stillness, his gaze on the horizon where the sun's rays began to vanquish the night. The centurion, now more a relic of war than its harbinger, turned to Artaxerxes, who stood observing the weary faces of those who had defied death's embrace. "Artaxerxes, we have paid dearly for this dawn." Cassius's voice was a low rumble, carrying the weight of countless lost lives. "The empire, our people, we are but shadows of what once was." Artaxerxes, his once pristine robes now dulled with the dust of desolation, inclined his head. "And yet from shadows, we must emerge to forge a path forward. With every end comes a beginning, Cassius. Shall we let our losses define us, or shall we honor them by rebuilding?" The two men surveyed the gathering of survivors, a congregation of the broken yet unbowed. Tiberius, now a veteran of battles he could never have envisioned, approached the leaders, his youthful visage aged by the trials he had endured. "Cassius, we prepare to honor the fallen. Your voice should lead the tribute," Tiberius implored, his tone imbued with a respect hard-earned and freely given. Cassius nodded, accepting the mantle of remembrance. The assembly fell silent as he stepped forward, the morning light casting a halo around his form. "We stand amidst the remnants of our world, a testimony to the irrepressible spirit of those who have passed. Let each stone we lay, each word we speak, be in remembrance of their sacrifice." our fallen comrades, our cherished kin, may they find peace in the great beyond. The words echoed through the hearts of the survivors, a resonant truth that bridged the chasm of loss. A collective murmur of assent rose, a chorus of souls united in grief and resolve. Artaxerxes, moved by the ceremony, shared his own reflections. In Persia, we believe that the spirits of the departed watch over us, guiding our steps. They have become the stars by which we navigate this new world. Let us honor them not with tears, but with the promise of a future they fought to preserve. The survivors began the arduous task of rebuilding, their hands working in unison to clear the debris, to mend what had been sundered. Lucius, his ambition now channeled into the reconstruction, directed the soldiers with a newfound sense of purpose. The walls we rebuild today are not just of stone and mortar, Lucius declared, his voice carrying across the stones. They are the foundations of a new empire, one that will rise from the ashes of the old, stronger and more indomitable. Cassius and Artaxerxes, standing side by side, looked upon the seeds of a new civilization being sown. The blend of Roman and Persian wisdom, once thought impossible, now became the cornerstone of survival. As the day waned, the setting sun cast long shadows over the land, a visual reminder of the journey from darkness into light. Cassius, his wounds a dull ache, spoke once more to the gathering dusk. Let this day mark not the end, but the inception of a world reborn. We have been given the rarest of opportunities to rewrite the story of humanity. Let us inscribe a tale of unity, of perseverance, of a humanity that withers not in the face of adversity but flourishes. Tiberius, inspired by the centurion's words, turned to the youths among the survivors. Come, let us learn the art of stone and strategy, for we are the vanguard of tomorrow. Artaxerxes, his thoughts with his distant homeland, added, And let us be as scholars, seeking knowledge amidst the ruins, for in wisdom lies the key to our ascent from this darkness. The night settled over Constantinople with a peaceful hush, the survivors finding solace in their shared labor. The city, a illuminator of human steadfastness, whispered of the undying hope that tomorrow held. In the hearts of Cassius and Artaxerxes, and all who toiled for the rebirth of their world, the ember of scholastic pursuit glowed brightly, promising a renaissance of thought, of culture, of humanity, a true dawn of the new day. The end. We're glad you were here for Withering Humanity. With StoryWave.ai, your prompts become unforgettable tales. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for daily explorations into storytelling. April 2024. Fare thee well.